The sun hung mercilessly overhead as Samuel Hayes guided his weathered horse across the endless expanse of the American frontier. Dust clouds swirled around the hooves of his mount, creating a hazy veil that seemed to separate him from the rest of the world. For 3 weeks now, he had been riding through this unforgiving landscape, carrying nothing but the clothes on his back, a few supplies, and the weight of memories he desperately wanted to leave behind. Samuel was a man running from his past, a former cavalry officer who had witnessed too much bloodshed, too much senseless violence between settlers and native tribes. The uniform he once wore with pride now lay buried somewhere in Kansas, along with his faith in the righteousness of his former cause. He had become what folks called a wandering stranger, a man with no destination, no purpose, except to keep moving until the ghosts of his past could no longer catch up with him. Before we continue with Samuel's incredible journey, I'd love for you to subscribe to our channel and let us know in the comments what city you're watching from. Your support means the world to us, and we love connecting with viewers from all corners of the globe. As the afternoon wore on, Samuel's horse began to show signs of exhaustion. The animal's breathing had become labored, and its pace had slowed considerably. Samuel knew he would need to find water soon, or both he and his faithful companion would be in serious trouble. The landscape around them offered little hope. Nothing but rolling hills covered in sparse grass and the occasional cluster of rocks that provided minimal shade. It was then, as he crested a small hill, that Samuel saw something that made him pull sharply on the reins. There, lying motionless beside a dried creek bed, was the figure of an elderly man. Even from a distance, Samuel could see that the man was Native American. His long grey hair spread across the dusty ground like silver threads. The stranger's clothes were traditional, buckskin pants and a fringed shirt that had seen better days. Samuel's first instinct was to ride on. In these parts, getting involved with native affairs could mean the difference between life and death for a white man traveling alone. The tensions between settlers and tribes had reached a boiling point, and trust was a luxury that few could afford. But as he sat there on his horse, watching the motionless figure, something deep within his conscience refused to let him continue. Dismounting slowly, Samuel approached the fallen man with caution. As he drew closer, he could see that the elderly native was still breathing, though each breath seemed to require tremendous effort. The man's face was weathered and lined with age, speaking of decades spent under the harsh western sun. His eyes, though closed, seemed to hold a wisdom that transcended the physical world. Samuel knelt beside the stranger and gently placed a hand on his shoulder. The old man's eyes fluttered open, revealing dark orbs that seemed to look straight through Samuel's soul. There was no fear in those eyes, no surprise, only a quiet acceptance that spoke of a man who had lived long enough to understand the unpredictable nature of fate. "Water," the old man whispered in heavily accented English, his voice barely audible above the wind that swept across the prairie. Without hesitation, Samuel reached for his canteen and carefully lifted the man's head, allowing him to drink slowly. The water seemed to bring some life back to the stranger's eyes, and he managed a weak smile of gratitude. Samuel could see that the man was suffering from severe dehydration and exhaustion, conditions that could prove fatal if left untreated. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and red, Samuel made a decision that would change the course of his life forever. He would not leave this man to die alone in the wilderness. Whatever the consequences might be, his conscience would not allow him to abandon someone in need. Samuel carefully lifted the elderly native and carried him to a small cluster of rocks that would provide some shelter from the wind. He then set about making camp, gathering what little dry wood he could find and starting a small fire. The flames danced in the growing darkness, casting flickering shadows across the faces of the two unlikely companions. Throughout the night, Samuel tended to his unexpected guest, He shared his meager supplies of food and water and used his own blanket to keep the old man warm as the desert temperature dropped dramatically. The elderly native drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes mumbling words in his native tongue that Samuel could not understand. But the gratitude in his eyes was unmistakable. As Samuel sat by the fire, watching over the sleeping stranger, he found himself thinking about the strange turns his life had taken. Just months ago, he had been a respected officer in the United States Cavalry, following orders without question and believing wholeheartedly in the mission to civilize the frontier. Now, here he was, sharing his fire and food with a man his former comrades would have considered an enemy. The night passed slowly, with Samuel keeping vigil over his charge. He dozed fitfully, always alert to any change in the old man's condition. Several times during the night, he checked to make sure the stranger was still breathing, and each time he was relieved to feel the steady rise and fall of the man's chest. As dawn approached, the elderly native seemed to grow stronger. He was able to sit up on his own and even managed to eat a small portion of Samuel's dried meat. The two men sat in comfortable silence, watching as the first rays of sunlight began to paint the eastern horizon in soft pastels. It was then that Samuel noticed something that made his blood run cold. In the distance, barely visible against the morning sky, he could see movement. At first, he thought it might be a herd of wild horses or buffalo, but as his eyes adjusted to the growing light, he realized the truth. Riders, many riders, and they were surrounding his small camp in a wide circle. Samuel's hand instinctively moved toward his revolver, but the elderly native placed a gentle but firm hand on his wrist. The old man's eyes were now fully alert, and there was something in his expression that told Samuel to remain calm. The stranger struggled to his feet, using Samuel's shoulder for support, and stood facing the approaching riders. As the sun climbed higher, the circle of riders became clearly visible. Samuel counted them quickly. There had to be at least 200 Apache warriors, each mounted on a painted horse and armed with rifles, bows, and traditional weapons. Their faces were painted for war, and their eyes held the cold determination of men prepared for battle. The sight was both magnificent and terrifying. The warriors sat motionless on their horses, creating a perfect circle around Samuel's small camp. Their horses pawed the ground impatiently, and the morning air was filled with the soft sounds of leather creaking and metal jingling. Samuel had never seen such a display of organized military precision, and he realized that he was witnessing something that few white men had ever lived to describe. At the head of the group, Samuel could see a younger warrior who was clearly the leader. The man's horse was more elaborately decorated than the others, and his bearing spoke of authority and command. This warrior's eyes were fixed not on Samuel, but on the elderly native who stood beside him. The old man began to speak in his native tongue, his voice carrying clearly across the morning air. Though Samuel could not understand the words, he could hear the strength and authority in the man's voice. This was not the voice of a dying stranger. This was the voice of someone accustomed to being heard and obeyed. As the elderly native continued to speak, Samuel began to notice changes in the demeanor of the surrounding warriors. The tension in their postures seemed to ease slightly, and several of them lowered their weapons. The leader of the group dismounted and approached the camp, his movements careful and respectful. When the warrior reached them, he dropped to one knee before the elderly native and spoke in rapid, urgent tones. Samuel watched in amazement as the old man he had rescued placed a hand on the warrior's head in what was clearly a gesture of blessing or forgiveness. It was then that the full magnitude of Samuel's situation became clear. The man he had saved was not just any elderly native. He was someone of tremendous importance to these Apache warriors. The respect and reverence they showed him indicated that he held a position of great authority within their tribe. The elderly native turned to Samuel and spoke in English, his voice now strong and clear. "You have shown kindness to one who did not deserve it, stranger. You have given water to the thirsty and shelter to the homeless, asking nothing in return. This is the mark of a man with honor." Samuel stood speechless as the old man continued, "I am Chief Running Bear of the Chiricahua Apache. These are my warriors, my sons, my protectors. They have been searching for me for 3 days, fearing that I had been taken by enemies or killed by wild animals. Instead, they find me alive and well, cared for by a white man who could have easily left me to die." The weight of this revelation hit Samuel like a physical blow. He had saved the life of an Apache chief, one of the most feared and respected leaders in the entire Southwest. The warriors surrounding him were not just any band of raiders. They were the elite guard of one of the most powerful men in the territory. Chief Running Bear raised his hand, and immediately all 200 warriors dismounted in perfect unison. The sound of their feet hitting the ground created a thunderous echo that seemed to shake the very earth beneath Samuel's feet. The chief then spoke again in Apache, his voice carrying the authority of absolute command. Samuel watched in wonder as the warriors began to move with purpose and precision. Some gathered wood and built up the small fire until it blazed brightly. Others brought food and water from their supplies, creating a feast that seemed to appear from nowhere. Still others tended to Samuel's horse, providing it with fresh water and grain. Within minutes, the small camp had been transformed into something resembling a military encampment. The warriors worked with the efficiency of men who had performed these tasks countless times before, and Samuel found himself at the center of what could only be described as a celebration. Chief Running Bear gestured for Samuel to sit beside him near the fire. "Tell me, stranger, what is your name, and what brings you to wander alone through Apache territory?" Samuel hesitated for a moment, unsure of how much he should reveal. But something in the chief's eyes told him that honesty would be not only appreciated, but expected. "My name is Samuel Hayes, Chief. I was once a soldier in the United States Cavalry, but I left that life behind. I've been traveling west, looking for... I'm not sure what I'm looking for." The chief nodded slowly, as if Samuel's words confirmed something he had already suspected. "A man does not abandon his people and wander the desert unless his heart carries great pain. You have the look of one who has seen too much death, too much suffering." Samuel was amazed by the chief's perceptiveness. "You're right, Chief. I've seen things, done things that I can't forget. I thought if I kept moving, maybe I could leave it all behind." "The past is like a shadow," Chief Running Bear replied. "The faster you run from it, the longer it becomes. But when you stop and face it, you discover that it is only as large as you allow it to be." As the morning progressed, Samuel found himself drawn into conversations with various warriors. Many of them spoke some English, and they were curious about this white man who had shown such kindness to their chief. Samuel learned that Chief Running Bear was not only a military leader, but also a spiritual guide for his people, a man whose wisdom was sought by tribes throughout the region. The feast that the warriors had prepared was unlike anything Samuel had ever experienced. There was roasted venison, corn cakes, and various plants and roots that he didn't recognize, but found surprisingly delicious. The Apache warriors shared their food freely, treating Samuel not as a stranger or potential enemy, but as an honored guest. As they ate, Chief Running Bear told Samuel about his people's way of life, their connection to the land, and their struggles to maintain their traditions in the face of increasing pressure from white settlers and the U.S. government. Samuel listened with growing understanding, realizing that many of the savage attacks he had heard about were actually desperate attempts by native peoples to protect their families and their way of life. "Your people see us as obstacles to be removed," the chief explained. "But we are not obstacles. We are human beings with the same hopes and fears as anyone else. We love our children, we mourn our dead, and we dream of a future where our grandchildren can live in peace." Samuel felt a deep shame wash over him as he remembered some of the actions he had taken as a cavalry officer. How many Apache families had been destroyed by raids he had participated in? How many children had been left orphaned because of orders he had followed without question? "I'm sorry, Chief," Samuel said quietly. "I'm sorry for the pain my people have caused yours. I'm sorry for the part I played in that pain." Chief Running Bear placed a weathered hand on Samuel's shoulder. A man who can acknowledge his mistakes and feel genuine remorse for them is a man who can change. Your sorrow tells me that your heart is not lost. Samuel Hayes. As the day wore on, Samuel began to understand that this encounter was about much more than a simple rescue. The chief and his warriors were showing him a different way of looking at the world, a perspective that valued cooperation over conquest, wisdom over warfare. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon when Chief Running Bear stood and addressed his warriors in Apache. Samuel could sense that something important was happening, though he couldn't understand the words being spoken. The chief then turned to Samuel. "My friend, you have given me the greatest gift one man can give another. You have given me my life. In return, I wish to give you something that I hope will be of equal value." Samuel started to protest that no gift was necessary, but the chief raised his hand for silence. "You are searching for something, Samuel Hayes, though you may not know what it is. You are looking for a way to make peace with your past and find purpose for your future. I believe I can help you with both." Chief Running Bear gestured toward the assembled warriors. "These men have agreed to something that has never been done before in the history of our people. They have agreed to accept you as one of us if you choose to stay." Samuel's eyes widened in shock. "Chief, I don't understand. You're offering to make me a member of your tribe." "Not just a member," the chief replied. "A brother, a warrior, a protector of our people. You have already proven that you have the heart of an Apache. You showed compassion to a stranger in need, even when it might have cost you your life. This is the highest virtue among our people." Samuel looked around at the faces of the warriors surrounding him. Instead of the hostility he might have expected, he saw acceptance, even approval. These men, who had every reason to hate him for his past as a cavalry officer, were willing to welcome him into their family. "But Chief," Samuel said, his voice filled with emotion, "I was a soldier. I fought against your people. How can you trust me?" Chief Running Bear smiled, and for the first time, Samuel saw not the face of a feared war leader, but the gentle expression of a wise grandfather. "Because, my friend, yesterday you were a soldier following orders. Today, you are a man following his conscience. Tomorrow, you can be whatever you choose to be." The offer was overwhelming. Samuel had spent months wandering aimlessly, trying to escape his past and find some meaning for his future. Now, in the most unlikely of circumstances, he was being offered exactly what he had been searching for, a chance to start over, to become part of something larger than himself. But the decision was not an easy one. Accepting the chief's offer would mean leaving behind everything he had ever known, everything that connected him to his former life. It would mean learning a new language, new customs, new ways of thinking about the world. It would mean becoming, in the eyes of his former countrymen, a traitor. As Samuel wrestled with these thoughts, he became aware that the warriors around him were beginning to prepare for departure. The sun was getting low, and it was clear that the chief and his men needed to return to their village before nightfall. Chief Running Bear seemed to sense Samuel's internal struggle. "You do not need to decide now, my friend. Take time to think about what I have offered. If you choose to accept, ride north until you reach the red rocks that look like sleeping giants. There you will find our village. Ask for Chief Running Bear, and you will be welcomed." The chief paused and looked directly into Samuel's eyes. "But know this. If you come to us, you must come with a clean heart and a clear purpose. We cannot accept a man who is still running from his past. You must be ready to embrace a new future." Samuel nodded, understanding the weight of what was being asked of him. This was not just an invitation to join a tribe, it was a challenge to transform himself completely, to become the man he had always had the potential to be. As the Apache warriors mounted their horses and prepared to leave, Samuel felt a strange mixture of gratitude and loneliness. For a few hours, he had experienced what it felt like to be part of a community, to be accepted and valued for who he was, rather than judged for what he had done. Chief Running Bear was the last to mount his horse. Before leaving, he approached Samuel one final time. "Remember, Samuel Hayes, the desert teaches us that even the smallest seed can grow into something beautiful if it finds the right soil. Perhaps you have found your soil today." With that, the chief mounted his horse and raised his hand in a gesture of farewell. The 200 Apache warriors formed up behind him with the same precision they had shown upon their arrival. Within minutes, they had disappeared over the horizon, leaving Samuel alone with his thoughts and his horse. As the sun set and the stars began to appear in the vast western sky, Samuel sat by his small fire and contemplated the extraordinary day he had just experienced. 24 hours ago, he had been a lost and aimless wanderer. Now, he had been offered the chance to become something he had never imagined possible, a bridge between two worlds. A man who could help heal the wounds that divided his people from the Apache. The decision before him was monumental, but for the first time in months, Samuel felt a sense of hope stirring in his chest. Perhaps Chief Running Bear was right. Perhaps he had finally found the soil in which his new life could take root and grow. As he prepared to sleep under the star-filled sky, Samuel made a silent promise to himself. Tomorrow he would begin the journey north toward the red rocks that looked like sleeping giants. Tomorrow he would begin the journey toward becoming the man he was meant to be. The desert wind whispered through the night, carrying with it the promise of transformation and the hope of redemption. And Samuel Hayes, former cavalry officer turned wandering stranger, closed his eyes and dreamed of a future where the color of a man's skin mattered less than the content of his character, where former enemies could become brothers, and where even the most lost soul could find their way home. In the morning, he would pack his few belongings and point his horse toward the north. He would ride toward the red rocks and toward a destiny that he could never have imagined when he first set out on his aimless journey across the American frontier. The wandering stranger had found his purpose at last, and it was more beautiful and challenging than anything he had ever dared to hope for. The story of Samuel Hayes was far from over. In many ways it was just beginning. But on this night, under the vast canopy of western stars, he slept peacefully for the first time in months, knowing that tomorrow would bring not just another day of wandering, but the first day of his new life as a man with a mission, a purpose, and a people to call his own.